Welcome, everybody, to The Focus. This is the July/August edition of this show where we bring on the best of the best that AE911Truth has to offer. Board member engineers from our group, and as well as volunteers with Project Due Diligence. And we discuss the top issues within the engineering profession related, of course, to our issue, the controlled demolitions of Towers 1, 2, and 7 of the World Trade Center on that day. And we're going to have AE911Truth Chairman talking about how we can wake up the engineering profession, because that's what it's all about. We got to wake them up. We got to get them involved. This affects their profession. You can't get them to just swallow a lie and continue on with it for 20 years. So this is going to be more of a discussion format. So let's go ahead and bring our panel on in. Our first one is Gene Johnson. Gene is a board member for AE911Truth. He has a BSME and 30 plus years of experience as a construction and mining engineer, and he is a volunteer with Project Due Diligence. He is joined by Jon Schuler, who is a civil engineer. He has a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Lehigh University and a Master of Science in Civil Engineering from a little university called the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We're all familiar with that here in the support base of AE911Truth. And he's also a volunteer with Project Due Diligence. They are joined by Kamal Obeid, who holds a master's degree in civil engineering from the University of California, Berkeley. He's been a practicing civil engineer and structural engineer in the San Francisco Bay Area since 1980, and licensed in structural engineering since 1985. He's a former volunteer with FEMA investigating earthquake failures and a longtime member of the Structural Engineers Association of Northern California. He's also a board member here at AE911Truth. And of course, leading the discussion today is going to be AE911Truth's chairman. Let's bring him on in there. This is Roland Angle. He graduated from the University of California, Berkeley with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. He also served in the U.S. Army Special Forces, where he was trained in the use of explosives. He's got 50 plus years of engineering experience, and it's included designing and testing blast-hardened missile launch facilities and designing U.S. naval explosive containers, harbor terminal facilities, earth foundation systems, and hydraulic systems. Plus, he's owned 3 construction companies and taught engineering subjects to high school students. And he's going to be leading the discussion, as I said, about how we can wake up the engineering profession. So I will participate, but I am more of a listener/guest today. Roland, why don't you get the ball rolling?
Thank you, Andy. Glad to be here, and thanks you guys for showing up. And this is, I think, an important discussion that we need to have at this time. I want to kind of summarize what we've accomplished up until now very quickly. Architects and Engineers for 911Truth was founded in 2006. For about the last 5 years, we've focused exclusively pretty much on the structural and civil engineering communities, the professional organizations, because we've come to understand through our work that there is a huge disconnect between what our rank and file fellow colleagues in the engineering profession understand about what happened to those 3 buildings at the World Trade Center on 9/11 versus what the leadership of our various professional organizations is saying and proclaiming to the world. We have taken our information, our criticisms of the NIST reports to more than 1,000 engineers in the past 4 years in these organizations, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the National Society of Professional Engineers, and the other engineering organizations such as the National Alliance of Forensic Engineers, the Structural Engineering Associations. And what we found by presenting the information that we have uncovered is that they are in complete agreement with us that the NIST reports are fatally flawed. They come to conclusions that are not consistent with the evidence. We have submitted a request for correction to NIST on the Building 7 report, and they responded with a non-response, basically saying that they stood by their original conclusions. So if we look at the problem that we're facing, it looks like this. We have a government report, in this case, two reports from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which claim that the Twin Towers and Building 7 all came down as a result of, in the case of the towers, the plane impacts and the fires, and in the case of Building 7, just fires. Now, these unprecedented events, they purported to explain with the reports that they issued as they were required to under the congressional law that was passed, the National Construction Safety Team Act. And so they issued their reports. We examined their reports. We found their reports to be full of flaws. They don't meet our professional standards. We attempted to get them to correct their report. NIST refused. We have gone to the national leadership of our professional organizations. They all have issued statements standing by the NIST reports, claiming that they meet our professional standards. And they have furthermore attempted to prevent us from giving our presentations to their membership. So we have this dilemma. We know that these reports, which are supposed to explain one of the two of the most important engineering failures in the history of engineering community, are wrong. And our professional leadership is standing behind them and refusing to admit that there are problems. So our problem is this: how are we going to get our engineering professions to change their position? We know there's a huge disconnect between the members and the position of the leadership. The position of the leadership is that the reports are fine. The position of the members, we found, is 100% us in saying that the reports do not meet our professional standards. So our profession is going to pay a heavy price for being on the wrong side of this question, which falls within the purvey of our professional competence. And furthermore, it's an ethical violation for us not to take this issue up and point out the problems and try to come to some resolution that's consistent with our experience and our training. So, after 5 years of doggedly plugging away, presenting more than 50 presentations to rank and file engineers, we have come to this conclusion that now we need to actually mount a movement within the professional organizations themselves to get the leadership to change its position and call for a new investigation if they're going to be consistent with our knowledge and our experience. It's either that or we have to replace that leadership. Now, we know that the leadership in most of these organizations changes on a regular basis. For instance, in the ASCE, at the local level and at the national level, they rotate their leadership and people change positions. So there is an opportunity every year to get somebody into those leadership positions that is going to support our position and call for a new investigation. If and when that happens, NIST will not have any reliance on the professional community to back up their position, and they'll be under great pressure to have to respond with a new impartial investigation. So that's sort of a summary of what we've accomplished to date and the problems that we face at the present time. So what I want to do with this discussion is to sort of kick around ideas about how we might effect this change in the leadership of our professional organizations and accomplish a new position taken by our organizations that calls for a new investigation. So I'm going to leave the floor open to anybody that wants to speak to this, because right now we're brainstorming for ideas about how we might approach this obstacle and overcome it for the sake of salvaging the reputation of our professional organizations, of our entire profession.
Well, let me start by asking a question, Roland, and I want to hear this also from everybody too. When you talk to an engineer and they refuse to look at this, is there any indication of shame or any attempt to try to explain it from this point of view? And then when they do that, do they even have a clue what they're talking about regarding the official story? I'll get just a quick example. This is architects, not engineers, but when I was at AIA, talked to an architect about Building 7, and the guy tries to argue that it was seismic activity. He wants to say that an earthquake happened on the same day as 9/11. This was absolutely ridiculous, very entertaining for me, but that shows to what lengths that some of these people will go to try to just dismiss what is right in front of them. So are they even attempting to understand the official story, or are they just dismissing it? And I want to hear from everybody.
Gene, you were at the forensic conversation, the forensic convention in Austin a few years ago with me, and you had the occasion to talk to some of these engineers. What do you remember about what they said?
Well, I think one of the things we have to do is explain project due diligence. Some of the audience might not know what that was, but at the presentation you made in Austin, you kicked off what we call project due diligence, which is actually a peer review of the two NIST reports. The first NIST report was on the Twin Towers, the second one on Building 7. And at that point, I became a volunteer, and over the years, the past 4 years, like you mentioned, we've presented project due diligence to over 1,000 engineers, and we haven't really had anybody disagree with our conclusions. In fact, most of the engineers weren't even aware of Building 7. One of the things that we have to do, a lot of people have talked about the apathy of the American people, and why don't they do something? We feel like we've presented our case well enough so that everybody should be supporting us, but that's not happening. And the reason it's not happening is because the engineering profession has betrayed our profession. The engineering management has betrayed our profession. 4 years ago, the University of Alaska Fairbanks Civil Engineering Department came out with a conclusion that Building 7, the only way it could have been brought down the way the videos show it coming down, symmetrically in its own footprint in 7 seconds, the only way that could have happened is if there was controlled demolition, removing all of the structure for 8 floors. The thing about it is it fell into its own footprint in 7 seconds, and that was with free fall about a little over 2 seconds. Now, that kind of a report should have hit mainstream news. It should have been the World Trade Center failure. The World Trade Center event had huge consequences for the American people, and the paper that came out of University of Alaska should have triggered a response, a huge response from everybody, including the universities, all of the engineering organizations, but it was completely ignored. So the problem with the apathy that we see in the general population is that they're looking to the engineering organizations that support the NIST report. So I think that what Roland is suggesting is that we need to bring in the engineers and see whether or not we can resolve the dichotomy, the issue of what they're saying, their support of the NIST reports.
Now, I just want to say it's funny you mentioned the University of Alaska Fairbanks Building 7 report, because we have yet another panelist, a little late today, but better late than never. Our supporters may recognize this gentleman. This is Dr. Leroy Hulsey. He's professor emeritus at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where he taught structural engineering. And before coming to the university, he owned and ran 3 high-tech engineering research corporations. And he is the man behind that very report. So thank you for joining the discussion, Dr. Hulsey.
Thank you for being patient with me. I ended up with another meeting at the same time, unfortunately. So thank you, guys.
So to talk about the apathy of the engineering community, and I'm glad that you came in right at that point. I swear I did not plan that, folks. We did have that report come out. We did everything we could to publicize it. It got a little bit of coverage out there, but it did not get picked up a lot by the engineering community. They didn't want to even touch this issue. What is your thoughts on that, Dr. Hulsey?
Sometimes things like this takes a while to get to people. I will tell you that let's not talk about engineers right at the moment. Let's talk about the media. I mean, not the media, but the people that live day to day and have friends and loved ones that got hurt there and all kinds of other things. And you would not believe how many times people come up to me and talk about it, and they're not engineers at all. They are, they could be blue collar workers. They could be anything. And through that dialogue, the engineers are now starting to wake up, I think, and not be so resistive and so worrisome about the possibility of losing funding if you're at a university, or the possibility of losing funding if you're running a company. And it's all about the money. So at the end of the day, I can tell you that the University of Alaska Fairbanks did not lose funding, in spite of the fact we did something highly controversial, and other universities probably said, no, we're not going to go there. We'll lose all of our funding. Actually, the funding picked up. It didn't impact the other fields at all. And, I'm up there now doing research from a private company. And so I think what you're going to see over and over again is, one guy gets on the beach and dances and nobody goes near him. And then the second guy goes out there and they're friends. But all of a sudden, two, and then there's a third, and all of a sudden the whole city is out there dancing on the beach, because people don't really like to be isolated. But when there's a group, then they don't have to worry so much. And so I think what we saw, I mean, I didn't see it, but I've heard about it. The recent conversation at the meeting, over 40 people there. I think that's a huge step.
That's right.
Huge
and,
step.
as Mark, sorry, I thought you were finished, but I just wanted to interject, these people worrying about funding, as Mark Twain said it, and I'll butcher the quote, but half the things he worried about in life never even happened to begin with. So that's sometimes you just got to be bold, and a certain window blow a certain way and everything works out. Roland, what do you have to say about the role of the funding in suppressing this issue to universities, businesses? Money makes the world go round. What part does that play in 9/11 Truth?
I think it plays a huge part. I think what Professor Hulsey points out is that people are afraid for their livelihood. Civil and structural engineering profession is hugely dependent upon government funding, large grants, big projects, a lot of people employed in the profession in those endeavors. And I've seen it myself in the work that I was involved in when I was working in the private industry. I saw the companies that I was working for that had huge contracts with the government. There was a lot of pressure to conform to what the government agency that you happen to be working for wanted you to do. It might be something that doesn't have anything to do with the job, but they would come in and demand that everybody buy bonds and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of resentment on the part of the engineering staff when it came to those requirements, but everybody sort of got used to bending in the wind and saying, well, if that's what we need to do to land the contract, that's what we'll do. So I've seen it in action, and this is a highly controversial issue. And we're up against not only the government and its agencies, we're also up against the leaders of our own professional organizations. And the reason why we're up against them is because they were enlisted by the government agencies to help produce the very reports that we think are fraudulent. So it's not only the fact that they might lose their funding, we're talking about people that are going to lose their professional status and their authority in our profession because they went along with a lie, and they probably even played a part in some cases in constructing that lie.
So may I interrupt here for a second, Roland?
Sure.
So I didn't realize just how significant this could be, because I didn't pay attention to what was being said out there. I intentionally closed myself and my students off and only worked with the science. But when I was invited by AE911Truth to come and teach it, make a presentation at Berkeley, all of a sudden my eyes were opened. Now, Berkeley, probably number one school in my field, at least it was for a long time. And what happened when I got there? The professors made sure the students didn't come, and they didn't come, and the head of the department made sure that none of the faculty would be there. So we had a couple of students or so who were there that just chose not to pay attention to what they were saying. But for the most part, nobody from the university was there. It was all about the private world. And you know what that was about, because Berkeley was no way were they going to contest it, because they had already been part of the NIST operation, as well as they didn't want to let anybody know that they had changed their minds.
Well, I'd like to know, how important is it, the status? Like, okay, you're an ASCE president. I understand you rotate out like every year or 2 years or something. Correct me in a moment on what that is. But, how important is it to be able to say that I was president for a year of this chapter? And is it really worth being part of, even a small part of this cover up, by not addressing it, by losing it? Like, what happens to you if you get kicked out of being the president? Is your business really going to suffer as a result?
I don't know of it ever of an instance of that ever happening. So typically my perception is, and everybody else can weigh on this as they see fit, but my perception of these professional organizations is that the people that join them are pretty much interested in trying to climb the ladder within that organization and gain prestige in that manner. So they have a perspective that is sort of we're going to go along with whatever the dominant, whichever way the wind is blowing, that's the way we're going to point. And that was one of the reasons why I never joined ASCE after I got out of college. I was in their engineering fraternity, their honor fraternity, because it promoted the notion that engineers had an ethical responsibility to society, which I believe very strongly. But when I got out and saw the actions of the organization in the real world, it seemed to me like they were just a lobbying organization to bring in money for the profession, which I presume is necessary. But it didn't appeal to me in terms of, really getting down in the trenches and fighting the fights that needed to be carried out to ensure that the engineering profession was meeting its ethical and professional responsibilities.
So Andy, I think I have a slightly different perspective here. Number one, if you are going up the ladder and you're talking about ASCE nationally, you're going to see one thing. But if you're talking about ASCE organizations locally, it's sometimes hard to get anybody to run for those offices. And even carry them out. I mean, I was president, I was vice president, I was secretary of state, secretary. I trying to recruit somebody to replace me was a big step. Yeah, and so they knew that these guys, they wanted to participate locally, but they didn't want to go to the nationals. Now, there's exceptions to that, and so I think it depends a lot on who you are and where you want to go and what you want to do. But bringing back to Roland's comment, I was a student from 1993 through 2020. When I left, I was the faculty advisor of the ASC student chapter, and we did a ice arch there, and we wanted to get it published in an ASCE magazine, and it was a student project, and I thought it was really in educationally good for everybody, including the students. ASC came back and said, we will not publish it. We do not do student stuff. And I thought to myself, what are you good for then? You know, you're supposed to be enhancing the student. You're supposed to be providing ethics. You're supposed to be doing all these things, and you choose not to do this. So anyway, I think it's kind of erratic.
I would like to point out one thing that we learned, Leroy, while we've been doing this outreach. You know, there's 161 local branches of the ASC in the continental United States,
Yep,
including Alaska and Hawaii. And most of those branches responded to us when we asked them if they could allow us to make a presentation. And not one single large metropolitan branch ever allowed us to make a presentation. It was all the local small branches in the rural areas that wanted to have us in, because they were actually interested in the issue, and they weren't concerned so much about whether or not this was going to be a gold star for them or a black mark on their record with the leadership. They pretty much didn't care what the state or national leadership thought. They were independent in the sense that they were just trying to do a job and present interesting engineering information to their colleagues. Whereas in the big cities, it was very clear that the national and state organizations had very strong people in those positions that said, nope, we don't want to hear your presentation. Nope, you're a bunch of conspiracy theorists, very hostile. So it's a breakdown of the big cities versus the rural areas, just like we're seeing in a lot of other areas in our society today.
Well, I'd like to know anyone's opinion. Why is that? What is it about the big cities, a bigger population concentration there? You get more of these people that are ambitious and want to get to the top and will toe the company line, whereas in the smaller areas, I mean, I know Alaska's got a small population within the United States. It's you have trouble filling the seats when they come open. I mean, is it because of the population, or is there another factor at work?
Well, I think that's a great question. I'm in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, and I've been very involved in the past with the Structural Engineers Association, the local SEONC here, the Northern California chapter. I've participated with committees and chaired some committees. And my experience in general, some of that I did after 9/11. And my experience in general is that, see, we have people here that want to be the engineer's engineer. They want to shine in their research. They want to shine in their work. And what I see a lot of happening at those engineering associations, what they like to focus on is awards for incredible design and beautiful work and incredible research. And my experience when I talk to other structural engineers about this issue here, they tend to shut down. They don't want to talk about it because there's nothing in it for them, for their career. So it's a fear of basically alienating their clientele or alienating their leadership that makes them so timid. So, I mean, I don't know what the solution to that is at this point, but I think that the critical mass, and I think as Leroy is, I like the optimism, Leroy, that when you start talking to other people who are not engineers and you try to get them excited about this, eventually the critical mass is going to create pressure. And I think also through the project due diligence memberships, various different organizations that are maybe not the metropolitan areas, but I think the critical mass is going to be so important in shifting, the attitude. It's a long haul. It's a long, difficult road, but we must keep at it because this is so important. It has so many implications, not only to the engineering profession itself, but also to the world.
So Andy, let me bring up another point here, and I don't know how important it is, but in Alaska, when I was doing this research, the ASCE student chapter, they did this as well, but ASCE local chapter in Fairbanks asked me to come and make a presentation at their luncheon meeting. Then soon after that, the Professional Engineering Association did the same thing. And that happened more than once. That happened like 2 or 3 times a year for like 3 years. They wanted to keep they wanted an update on what was going on and what we were doing, which I thought was really quite enlightening. And then I finished it up, the report was done and so forth. And then I contacted Anchorage. Now, I know a lot of people in Anchorage, a lot of them are my former students, but I contacted the Structural Engineering Association, and the president would not even talk to me. So I went to a lot of my students and I said, hey, are you guys interested in hearing this? And they said, absolutely. I said, can you talk to him? Well, it was obvious that he was not going to buckle one bit. And so it didn't happen. So I then told myself, there's no way he's going to get away with this. So then I contacted the University of Alaska Anchorage and I said, hey, can you help me? And the faculty of the department chair, who I know really well, said, yeah, we have a meeting every month. You can be an invited speaker. And that's how I got to make a presentation in Anchorage. So we had to go around this one guy, and the one guy was controlling the whole environment, and yet there was others. And Anchorage is not the smallest community in the world, but it also is not the largest. So something about that large stuff seems to be a problem. When we went into Arizona, they're still contacting me, thanking me for making the presentation. It wasn't the best presentation in the world, but they're still trying to keep with us. And I think that's pretty neat.
Well, Leroy, just to update you on that, we were scheduled to have another presentation to that same organization in Arizona last month in June. And they got it. We were actually on the agenda. It was all settled. We had a speaker. It was on their schedule for the conference. And they managed to get in behind us and kick us out and get us off the schedule.
Really?
So, yeah. And that was due to the efforts of one particular engineer who happens to be an ex-member of the National Council of Structural Engineers Association. And she was the one that initiated the contact with the leadership and got that whole performance canceled. So I just can't emphasize enough, after more than 4 years here of what we've been doing, is that there's a dedicated group within the leadership of these organizations that absolutely will go out of their way to any extent possible to prevent us from getting our message to their members. There's not a lot of them, but they typically have a position of leadership. They may be on the board, they may be the president, the vice president, they may be a past president, but these are people that have some influence, and they utilize that influence to stop us. These are dedicated individuals. So we're not going to overcome that kind of resistance with just sort of a general plea to the members to do something about changing this position, because they're going to run into very, very stiff opposition that's going to attack us with ad hominem attacks. They're going to call us conspiracy theorists. They're going to say that we threaten their professional standing. They're going to use all kinds of lies, and they are dedicated to stopping us. So they've been they've been trained, they've been warned, they've been schooled, and they are efficient at what they do, because we've had just about as many presentations canceled as we've been able to perform. So they're out there, they're active. Wherever there is one of those people in an organization's leadership, we can almost bet we're not going to be able to get in, because our followers are not organized to that extent. They don't have that kind of position in the organization, and they don't have the commitment to make it happen and run up against opposition.
Well, how do you overcome that, though? I mean, that's kind of how it works. I don't, not just in the engineering field, but in other fields. I have no doubt that there's well-placed people in congressional offices, intelligence agencies, and whatnot to sort of maintain the status quo. How do you get past the gatekeepers? And anybody who wants to chime in, please feel free to.
Well, I'd like to hear other ideas, because I've been banging my head on this wall for 4 years.
Yeah, Andy, this is John. I really don't have a silver bullet answer either, that's for sure. But I will say that the one encouraging thing is when you try to talk to people about this, even if you might be rejected most of the time or by a group, there's somebody in that group you can tell who is listening and who might come up to you after the fact and ask to know more about it. And at least, you're encouraged that there's somebody out there who's got some integrity, some ethics, I would say, some courage, who isn't afraid to hear the truth and to help act on it. And, that could be any demographic, really. It could be a lot of young people are willing to listen. Some are, some aren't. And it's up to, retirees, anybody. We're talking about the professions. So, there are other groups we give these presentations to as well, besides professional groups. So you do find interested people out there. It's an interesting dynamic. I feel like Americans might be the most propagandized people on the planet, and we really aren't even aware of how to think about a lot of issues anymore. I know, Roland, you gave a very good presentation on our website about the Pearl Harbor events, and even at that time, government commissions were questioning the government. They weren't afraid to do it. It was not anathema then, and it certainly seems to be now. So we've probably regressed in that regard. But a silver bullet, I guess. Yeah, I don't know, Roland. We just have to keep banging at it, and maybe we'll find the Holy Grail there one day. I don't know.
You have to wonder what they have to gain by trying to create this problem.
Well, I will say this, we can't change things that are external to us, but I think what we can do is we can sharpen our presentations. And by that, I mean, it's so tough to get in front of these groups. We have to work so hard to make it happen. When we get there, we're so grateful that they're listening to us, and we focus on the technical aspects of things. And we're so happy that they see what we're talking about, they get it, and they agree with us. But then we don't go that next step, which is to be upfront about saying, this is an existential threat to our profession. We need to understand that if we do not change this, our profession is going to lose all credibility. Because as the wider understanding of what happens spreads amongst the population, they are going to look at us and say, what is wrong with you? How come you're going along with this? And how come your profession is, the leadership of your profession is whitewashing this report? What happened? Why are you not fulfilling your contract with society? This is going to lead to a decline in the reputation and the importance of our profession. And if we don't act against it, we're guaranteeing that we're going to go down a road of decline and fall, not only for our profession, but for the wider society that depends upon us to tell them the truth about these matters. And somehow we're not inspiring that professional code within our colleagues to have the courage to stand up against their leadership and make a fight out of this. We walk away, everybody agrees, yeah, we think you're right, we need a new investigation, but then they're not inspired to act, to organize and make it happen within the sphere that they're operating.
Well, let me say this. My mom always said this expression that nobody does anything they'd rather not do unless they're afraid of something else. It's the reason that the janitor gets up in the morning. Nobody would volunteer to go to the middle school and clean the toilets. They just, they're doing it because they're getting paid and they don't want to get evicted from their apartment, right? And it's what we saw when we did the C-SPAN campaign. I mean, they gave us our time on that show because they wanted the calls to stop. So we created a situation where giving us what we wanted was better than not giving us what we wanted. Now, you don't want to get too extreme with this attitude, of course, but what do you think about this principle in relation to the dilemma that project due diligence is facing? And if you agree with the principle, how do we implement it?
Well, my thought is that you have to make it more uncomfortable for the leadership of the organization to continue to stonewall us because they face some alternative. And I promoted the idea some time ago that we should call out these organizations publicly and say, listen, you're on the wrong side of this issue. We know that because your members tell us so. You need to change your position or there's going to be consequences. Now, one of those consequences could be we could go after them through the IRS and say they're not fulfilling, they're nonprofits, okay? They're not fulfilling their mission as elucidated with their own mission statements. They're supposed to educate the public. They're supposed to stand up for the ethical standards of the profession. They've got a lot of responsibilities that they take on when they get that nonprofit status. We could go after their nonprofit status. We could say, listen, they're not doing this. We could report them to the IRS. And the IRS, believe it or not, revokes the nonprofit status of more than 100 organizations every year because they do not meet their mission statement. They are not doing what they got their nonprofit status for. And the ASCE and these other organizations are failing in that regard. I think it's time that I'm just proposing this. It's one of the tactics that we could put forward and say, listen, we've tried to get you to engage. We've told you our story. We've talked to your members. They agree with us. You refuse to even have a discussion about this. This is part of your mission, your ethical responsibility to society as encoded in your mission statements that enables you to have a nonprofit status. Therefore, we're going to turn you in because we think your nonprofit status should be revoked. That's going after their money. And the money is the thing that matters, as we all know.
That's right. You know, and it's something that could be a rallying cry, not even just for engineers and project due diligence volunteers, but for the everyman, the rank and file supporter of a new investigation, people that watch these shows on YouTube. And I mean, if we could boil that down to 3 or 4 words, it could even be a slogan. You could be showing up. They could be showing up on the outside of some of these ASCE conferences with the signs and even filing their own complaints against the ASCE if they know how to do that. It's a process that you can figure out how to do. So yeah, absolutely. Those kinds of things. And I think we're at that point now. What do others think?
Well, I will say it again, it's a very tough task to basically, attack people in power. I mean, these are people with very powerful backgrounds in the profession. And so I think we need to tread very carefully that way. However, I would go back to critical mass. I mean, critical mass, getting memberships, the membership, the rank and file, the grassroots excited, and basically understanding the problem here should eventually make a difference. It's a very long haul, but that would be the approach, I would think.
I think maybe the rank the group typically are afraid to take on something that's controversial because they're liable to not be working tomorrow. They're liable to not be able to take care of their families. I think there's a lot of concerns to come in and say, I support this, when yet it is so controversial. And how do you take them and make them comfortable? If you got them in a place where they were comfortable and working on the side, then a lot of that might go away. I don't know. It just seems like I watched my friends in Anchorage when that president of the Structural Engineering Association said no. They didn't have the guts to stand up and say, we want him anyway.
I personally think this goes beyond the engineering profession and 9/11. I think that this country overall needs an entire reboot of its soul and what its priorities are. You see somebody who would sell their soul for a title at an organization or something like that. And they will do that. And this country is full of them. I mean, you don't want to do something that'll land you in prison, obviously, or hurt another person physically. But you got to be able to let go of these things, this desire for prestige of being the president of the ASCE chapter of Peoria, Illinois. Oh, my God. You know what? In the end, we're all going to end up in the same place. George Washington, he has his face all over monuments throughout this country, but in the end, he ends up in the same place that we all do. And it doesn't really matter. And we need to prioritize what is important within ourselves, and then we take that out into the world. So be willing to let go of these little goodies and these titles of prestige that you imagine in your head that ultimately don't really mean anything, and do the right thing so that you can live with yourself. That is the most important thing, and that kind of change is going to take a long time culturally, but I think that's where it starts.
Well, these are tough times, and I think up until now, we've all been able to, one way or another, by our wits and by our efforts, live a fairly comfortable life. And I think that's coming to an end for many, many people.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to recognize that in times like these, it's leadership is called for. It matters. I recently heard a presentation on the Washington crossing the Delaware. We've all seen the picture of him standing in the boat and all the soldiers huddled there as they're going across the river. At that point, the Revolutionary Army of the Americas was beaten. They were losing their conscripts. They were going home. People were giving up. It was the middle of winter. They had lost a number of battles. They were facing a superior mercenary army, and they had no outlook. And George Washington lined them up on Christmas Eve, and he said, "Listen, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to take on the Hessians, and they'll be surprised. They're not expecting us tonight. It's Christmas Eve. We can beat them. We have the element of surprise, and we need to take the initiative. And if we don't do that, all is lost. So this is it. It's either now or never. And I'm asking every one of you to come along and fight the fight." And they went across the river, they beat the Hessians, and they turned the war around. That was the turning point in the war.
Yep.
So every crisis situation comes down to something like that. And I think we're approaching that point in our society where every single one of our professions is failing us. The legal profession, the medical profession, the engineering profession, every profession that is supposed to stand up and hold our society together, the heart of the middle class has been betraying us. And we are in the middle of it because our profession is right there too. And we have to take responsibility for that. And we, at this point, I don't think we're going to convert masses of people to become leaders, but we're looking for those few people that are willing to stand up and take the position that is unpopular and could cost them their livelihood, could cost them their property, could cost them even their freedom, to stand up and do the right thing. Because if we don't, we're going to lose everything.